Hello! Hello, fellas. Sorry I didn't do this yesterday. I was busy with other things. Can you guys all hear me? I was busy with all of the stuff going on with the current crisis. And so I had to delay this. I had to delay this till today. But on the bright side, I now have a paper copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I had it in my other house, and I was using the internet version before, but we have the proper one here right now. So, as we can tell from the title, we are going through man's capacity for God. This is our discussion topic today, and it is under section 1, I believe, we believe. Now, you can find the Catechism for free online. It's on the Vatican website. Okay, that's good, I can be heard. But I'm going to be reading through it on paper, and we're going to be going section by section and discussing what we see in the chat. So we will begin with the introduction to the section, I believe, we believe. We begin our profession of faith by saying, I believe, or we believe. But before expounding the Church's faith, as confessed in the Creed, celebrated in the liturgy, and lived in observance of God's commandments and in prayer, we must first ask what to believe means. Faith is man's response to God, who reveals himself and gives himself to man, at the same time bringing man a superabundant light as he searches for the ultimate meaning of his life. Thus, we shall consider first the search, and that's today's. Then the divine revelation by which God comes to meet man, which is chapter 2, which will be tomorrow's or the day after's or, the next episode. And finally, the response of faith, which is chapter 3. Okay, so we'll go through the first section here, which is a desire for God. If you guys have any kinds of questions, not necessarily even pertaining to the title of this video, but things that you will find useful that is somewhat within the remit, please do not hesitate to ask. So we're going to go first of all through section 1, which is the desire for God. The desire for God is written in the human heart, because man is created by God and for God, and God never ceases to draw man to himself. Only in God will he find the truth and happiness he never stops searching for. This is obviously because we are in the likeness and image of God. And it quotes from the Second Vatican Council here. The dignity of man rests above all on the fact that he is called to communion with God. This invitation to converse with God is addressed to man as soon as he comes into being. For if man exists, it is because God has created him through love, and through love continues to hold him in existence. He cannot live fully according to truth unless he freely acknowledges that love, and entrusts himself to his Creator. In other words, we cannot truly love as human beings unless we acknowledge God, because it is through God's love that we are made. You will not be a complete human being without the acknowledgement of God. That's what I'm getting out of this. The next section of this. In many ways, throughout history down to the present day, men have given expression to their quest for God in their religious beliefs and behaviour, in their prayers, sacrifices, rituals, meditations, and so forth. These forms of religious expression, despite the ambiguities they often bring with them, are so universal that one may call man a religious being. This, for those who are interested in Latin, is called the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans. Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans. Quoting from Acts, I believe this is from. From one ancestor, God, made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him. Though indeed he is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. We do not exist without God. Again, continuing on. But this intimate and vital bond of man to God can be forgotten, overlooked, and even explicitly rejected by man. Such attitudes can have different causes: revolt against evil in the world, religious ignorance or indifference, the cares and riches of this world, the scandal of bad example on the part of believers, currents of thought hostile to religion, and finally, that attitude of sinful man which makes him hide from God out of fear and flee his call. So, in other words, we have different reasons for ignoring this part of ourselves, but we all have this sense of the divine, inside of us. This is not at all. There's no ambiguities here, but we can choose not to. Now, for example, with atheists, and I say this as an atheist, a lot of the time it is purely ignorance. In my case, it was ignorance for the most part. I've seen many atheists who are willfully resist God. They believe that God is evil or something, and therefore they don't believe. You can see all of these made manifest in the world a lot. And so, be aware of this. And the one thing that we can control all of these things to a certain extent, particularly the scandal of bad example on the part of believers. This is something that everyone who listens to this, everyone should take this into account. When you are living a Catholic life, people will observe you and assume that you are it. Don't assume that they're going to read St. Augustine. Don't assume that they're going to read St. John Chrysostom. Don't assume that they're going to read St. Benedict. Don't assume they're going to read St. Thomas Aquinas. These things are irrelevant as far as most people are concerned. Only maybe 5% of people even read, let alone read to learn about other religions, or to learn about their friends in more detail. Very, very few people do this. And so we have to be absolutely rigid with ourselves so we don't misrepresent what we believe. Because if we do that in our own errors, we can lead people into even more catastrophic errors. Let's continue. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. This is from Psalm 105, verse 3. Although man can forget God or reject him, he never ceases to call every man to seek him, so as to find life and happiness, as that is our purpose for existence. But this search for God demands of a man every effort of intellect even. Sorry, I misread that. God demands of man every effort of intellect, a sound will, an upright heart, unquote, as well as the witness of others who teach him to seek God. So in other words, if you want to seek God, you have to be virtuous. This is a necessary thing. That's what it means to have an upright heart. It means to have your will in that which is good. As Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Now, we live in a time where people aren't pure in heart. They will especially sin against impurity. And this is one of those things that darkens the heart the most, because that particular passion is very, very strong. And so therefore a lot of people are going to not see God, for they are darkening their own hearts. The passage proceeds to go, "You are great, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great is your power, and your wisdom is without measure. And man, so small a part of your creation, wants to praise you. This man, though clothed with mortality and bearing the evidence of sin, and the proof that you withstand the proud. Despite everything, man, though but a small part of your creation, wants to praise you. You yourself encourage him to delight in your praise, for you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." That's why many people who don't acknowledge God are so restless and so unhappy. Now, this doesn't mean that religion is all of a sudden going to make you happy, but it does mean that we're fulfilling a fundamental faculty of our own existence. And so we have one less thing to be unhappy about. All of the sufferings we see in the world, all of the sufferings we undergo ourselves, all of these horrific things that we see, if we truly understand where all of this has proceeded from, then it's to no avail. There's no existential crises going on if we truly understand this, because we can at least reason it. The next section is ways of coming to know God. Created in God's image and called to know and love him, The person who seeks God discovers certain ways of coming to know him. These are also called proofs for the existence of God, not in the sense of proofs in the natural sciences, but rather in the sense of converging and convincing arguments, which allow us to attain certainty about the truth. These, quote, ways of approaching God from creation have a twofold point of departure: the physical world and the human person. We've already gone through some of these proofs in the last stream, if you fellows want to check them out, if you haven't seen that. The world, starting from movement, becoming contingency, and the world's order and beauty, one can come to a knowledge of God as the origin and the end of the universe. As St. Paul says to the Gentiles, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely, his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. And St. Augustine issues this challenge. Question the beauty of the earth. Question the beauty of the sea. Question the beauty of the air distending and diffusing itself. Question the beauty of the sky. Question all these realities. All respond, see, we are beautiful. Their beauty is a profession, confessio. These beauties are subject to change. Who made them if not the beautiful one, pulcher, who is not subject to change? The human person, with his openness to truth and beauty, his sense of moral goodness, those laws that were inscribed on the heart that were mentioned earlier on, his freedom and the voice of his conscience, with his longings for the infinite and for happiness, man questions himself about God's existence. In all this he discerns signs of his spiritual soul. The soul, the, quote, seed of eternity we bear in ourselves, irreducible to the merely material, can have its origin only in God. For the human soul is immaterial, you can't grasp it, and therefore it comes from God. Basically, it's because God in himself is immaterial, because all material proceeds from him. Aquinas says in a certain way, well, he says it in this particular way. Man is, in a sense, a compound being. We have the matter, which is our bodies, and we have the form, which is our minds. And the form of any essence in existence besides the divine essence is immaterial. And this is how, well, it's not essentially immaterial, but it's generally immaterial. I don't want to make any Descartesian errors here, that's why I'm making that qualification. The world and man attest that they contain within themselves neither their first principle nor their final end, but rather they participate in being itself, which alone is without origin or end. Thus, in different ways, man can come to know that there exists a reality which is the first cause and final end of all things, a reality, quote, that everyone calls God, unquote. This is from the Summa Theologiae. Yeah, I just looked at the footnote and I was right. This is from the second question of the prima part of the Summa Theologiae, this quote. Man's faculties make him capable of coming to a knowledge of the existence of a personal God. But for man to be able to enter into real intimacy with him, God willed both to reveal himself to man and to give him the grace of being able to welcome this revelation in faith. The proofs of God's existence, however, can predispose one to faith and help one to see that faith is not opposed to reason. Yes, I accepted the proofs of God's existence for quite a while. I'd say about a year. Maybe a little under a year. Yeah, nah, probably more like a year. But I never opened myself up to any sort of intimacy with God because I didn't figure that God was personal, even though my own arguments led to that necessary conclusion. It's not enough to just have the contingency argument, because the contingency argument is essentially unbreakable. I have seen arguments based on something called PSR and normative ethics, which are used by some people, but the thing is that this is from the category of ethics, and therefore it doesn't apply to metaphysics, first of all. And second of all, this is based on... The first premise of this argument is to say that God comes to knowledge, which he doesn't. God does not come to knowledge. God has all things. He is all things. He doesn't come to know. He is being. And so therefore, he is not forced to do anything which this argument seeks to make. And for a while, I kind of believed that. I didn't read that specific argument, but that was the belief that I had. So let's continue on to the next section. The knowledge of God according to the Church. Our Holy Mother, the Church, holds and teaches that God, the first principle and last end of all things, can be known with certainty from the created world by the natural light of human reason. First Vatican Council. Without this capacity, man would not be able to welcome God's revelation. Man has this capacity because he is created in the image of God, unquote. Okay, so two faculties that human beings have that no other things in creation have, aside from angels and demons. Intellect and will. Now, these things necessarily come from God because everything originates in God. And so, in order to actually understand God's revelation, which is the scriptures, as it will go on to explain, we need to be able to understand logic, because the fundamental rules of logic, the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of the excluded middle, are necessary to read almost every single sentence in that entire book. You cannot come to know God's relation to man or God's revelation without accepting these things. There are some people, such as presuppositionalists. I'm thinking specifically of those followers of Jediah, for example, who believe that logic is not necessary to read the Bible, and that it's in fact something satanic. No, this is a misconception. Logic is absolutely necessary to even read the Bible, let alone to believe in God. You need some sense of intellect. You need some sort of understanding of these laws. They oppose these laws because they were first codified by Aristotle, who was a pagan, but these laws are everywhere and self-evident. That's just a serious error I see often today, and it's something that needs to be dealt with, so I'm just iterating it here. In the historical conditions in which he finds himself, however, man experiences many difficulties in coming to know God by the light of reason alone. Though human reason is, strictly speaking, truly capable by its own natural power, and that being just in and of itself, natural power, in and of itself, and light of attaining to a true and certain knowledge of the one personal God, who watches over and controls the world by his providence, and of the natural law written in our hearts by the Creator, yet there are many obstacles which prevent reason from the effective and fruitful use of this inborn faculty. For the truths that concern the relations between God and man wholly transcend the visible order of things, and, if they are translated into human action and influence it, they call for self-surrender and abnegation. So, obviously, your ego is going to get in the way. The human mind, in its turn, is hampered in the attaining of such truths, not only by the impact of the senses and the imagination, but also by disordered appetites, which are the consequence of original sin. So, this meaning things like lust, gluttony, also our desires for ego as well would come under this original sin. It's called concupiscence when Aquinas and similar people write of this. So it happens that man in such matters easily persuades themselves that they would not like to be true. That what they would not like to be true is false, or at least doubtful. Yeah, basically, because we are innately sinful and we are innately destroying our own being, and we find these activities in a certain sense pleasurable, we are more than willing to deny certain more profound truths about reality in order to keep doing those pleasurable things. This is why man stands in need of being enlightened by God's revelation, not only about those things that exceed his understanding, but also, quote, about those religious and moral truths which of themselves are not beyond the grasp of human reason, so that even in the present condition of the human race, they can be known by all men with ease, with firm certainty, and with no admixture of error. So basically, we need God to overrule these aspects of original sin, these imperfections that we have, in order for us to come to a true understanding of Him. We cannot overcome these things without God. This does not originate in us. The overcoming of sin does not originate in us. Not by any stretch. It comes directly from God's grace. The next section, and I believe the final section. If anyone has any questions, now's the time to type it into the chat. How can we speak about God? In defending the ability of human reason to know God, the Church is expressing her confidence in the possibility of speaking about Him to all men and with all men, and therefore of dialogue with other religions, with philosophy and science, as well as with unbelievers and atheists. By the way, I've read later on in this. This is in no way suggesting the kind of ecumenism that would compromise beliefs. Since our knowledge of God is limited, our language about Him is equally so. We can name God only by taking creatures as our starting point, and in accordance with our limited human ways of knowing and thinking. This is precisely why God can simultaneously be infinitely just and infinitely merciful. And also infinitely everything else, but hey, I have to refer to everything else as a concept. All creatures bear a certain resemblance to God, most especially man, created in the image and likeness of God. Genesis 2, by the way. The manifold perfections of creatures, their truth, their goodness, their beauty, all reflect the infinite perfection of God. Consequently, we can name God by taking His creatures' perfections as our starting point. For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their Creator. God transcends all creatures. We know this because He's pure being. Creatures aren't pure being. They rely on God for their being, so He has to necessarily transcend creatures. We must therefore continually purify our language of everything in it that is limited, image-bound, or imperfect. If we are not to confuse our image of God, the inexpressible, and the incomprehensible, the invisible, the ungraspable, with our human representations, our human words always fall short of the mystery of God. If we fall into this trap, we are violating the first commandment, actually, because, love, you will have no idols before me, right? It violates the one of the idolatry. I think it's either the first or second commandment. You see, the thing is, like the divine office, so the first commandment often is Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is, you shall love your God, Lord your God, with all your heart, mind, soul, and will, and you shall speak of this law with your children and in the doorways, etc., etc. But I do believe it's like, you shall not have any false idols before me, and anything that is worshipping anything besides this mystery is idolatry. That means if you are pursuing money over the mystery of God, you are an idolater. If you are pursuing sex over the mystery of God, you are an idolater. If you are pursuing any named God, any sort of God that we hear about in the world, like the Greek, the Egyptian, the Babylonian pantheons, you are likewise being idolatrous. If you worship a particular image, and I mean worship, I don't mean venerate, which is something different which we'll get onto later on, you are an idolater. That is the prime sin. Because if you are worshipping something that isn't pure being, it won't sustain your being. Simple as. And finally, admittedly, in speaking about God like this, our language is using human modes of expression. Nevertheless, it really does attain to God Himself, though unable to express Him in His infinite simplicity. Likewise, we must recall that, quote, between creator and creature, no similitude can be expressed without implying an even greater dissimilitude. And that, concerning God, we cannot grasp what He is, but only what He is not, and how other beings stand in relation to Him. If you want to read about this final sentence, I really suggest you go and look into Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, because this is his theology here. The proper term is apophyraxis, but that's not necessary to understand this by any means. Basically, everything in the world is so imperfect that it does not even compare with pure being, which is, forever new. Okay, so that is this section in brief for those who have listened through, just as a review. Thankfully, this catechism has given a short description. Man is by nature and vocation a religious being, coming from God, going toward God. Man lives a fully human life only if he freely lives by his bond with God. Man is made to live in communion with God, in whom he finds happiness. When I am completely united to you, there will be no more sorrow or trials. Entirely full of you, my life will be complete, unquote. This is from Augustine's Confessions. When he listens to the message of creation and to the voice of conscience, man can arrive at certainty about the existence of God, the cause and the end of everything. The Church teaches that the one true God, our Creator and Lord, can be known with certainty from his works, by the natural light of human reason. In fact, also, this particular definition of God is why there are certain things that scandalize others, like the comparison, basically saying that Islam and Christianity worship the same God, because we both have this classically theistic idea of God being pure being. They just happen to be wrong about more specific things. We really can name God, starting from the manifold perfections of his creatures, which are likenesses of the infinitely perfect God, even if our limited language cannot exhaust their mystery. So, everything in the world is a reflection of God. Without the Creator, the creature vanishes. This is the reason why believers know that the love of Christ urges them to bring the light of the living God to those who do not know him and who reject him. Or who reject him, even. Anyway, this is the end of the first chapter of the first section. The next stream, which should be tomorrow, is God comes to meet man. So in other words, how we have already discussed what man can actively do with his faculties. But how is God going to help us? Well, we'll find that out. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you later. Goodbye.